Good evening. Welcome to this evening's community home repair workshop. Tonight we are going to do wall repair. I'm Tiana Harrison. I'm the Education and Volunteer Coordinator, and tonight's workshop is going to be facilitated by Jason, who is our Education Manager.
Thanks, Tiana. And thank you for everyone joining us at home. We had a little bit of a hiccup this afternoon when our instructor we were supposed to have doing wall repair let us know that he was ill. And so, Jake, we hope you're feeling better, and we are going to miss you tonight. Jake is the best wall repair facilitator, wall repair instructor in the world. So we're sad that we have to put up with Jason tonight instead, but that's okay. Tonight, we're going to be talking wall repair. We're talking about drywall repair. We're also talking about plaster, if you have plaster walls, and how to fix holes in those walls. Wall repair is something that many people look at as something that looks too big to tackle. Jake always tells the participants when he is teaching this class that if you can do something like spread butter on bread or ice a cake, you can do wall repair. So you don't need special tools. You need a little bit of special equipment, but it's stuff that you can buy fairly cheaply at the home center, at Home Depot or Lowe's or Menards, and a lot of the hardware stores carry it as well. We did break a few holes in the wall this evening, so we've got one hole here that is supposed to be looking like plaster. We've got another hole here and a couple smaller holes as well. You can tell they're shaped like hammer holes. So we were just beating the wall up with our hammer. So that was fun to do. We're going to talk about a couple different ways to patch those holes, depending on how big they are. We're also going to talk about the different materials that you need for patching them. So first things first, I want to introduce you to this bucket right here. This is called Drywall Mud, or joint compound. This is called +3, and +3 is what I normally use at home if I'm patching a hole in the wall, or if I'm doing a little bit of drywall work or something like that. But there's a couple different ways you can do it. There are some that are called easy sand or lightweight, and those are simply easier to sand. They're easier to get the rough edges out of. But I like the +3. You can also buy the joint compound or the mud as a powder in a bag, and this way is real economical because you only use what you only get what you're going to use in one time. So you can mix this up. It's a powder you mix up with water to about the consistency of peanut butter. So you can smear it around. You need to get all the little dry lumps out of it, and then you can use this as the filler for the holes. But like I said, I prefer using the already mixed that comes in a bucket. So if I can get the bucket open. This is what it looks like when you get it. It's fairly thick, but it looks about like peanut butter. And there's a variety of different tools you can use to spread it. Jake always says you can use kitchen tools if you really want to. So I did bring my spatulas along. Don't tell my wife because she's missing her spatulas. Don't worry, I'll have them back in time to make eggs tomorrow. You can also go to the hardware store, to the home center, and get one of these knives. These are called drywall knives or taping knives, and they come in a variety of different sizes. Oops. So you've got a nice little one here. You've got some wider ones. And the wider they are, the more difficult they are to patch the initial hole with. I tend to use a smaller one to do the initial patching and a larger one for the follow-up coats. One thing to remember with drywall or with wall patching is to take your time. You don't have to rush it. It's not something that you need to get it perfect the first time, and most likely you're not going to get it perfect the first time. Most people try to get it as smooth as they can the first time, and it ends up sagging or looking a little sloppy. And then they don't want to deal with it anymore, and so they just paint over it. So a lot of times you go into a house and you'll see ripples in the wall, and that's because somebody got tired of dealing with the drywall or dealing with the mud, and they just decided to paint it instead. But if you take your time, plan on taking 2 or 3 coats, meaning putting mud on 2 or 3 times and sanding each time in between. That's normally the way it goes. You might even have to do it a 4th time, and that's not a big deal. It's a fairly small investment. A bucket of mud like this, a 5-gallon bucket, runs a little less than $20 at the home center, so it's not a big investment. I didn't look up the price for the Easy Sand powder, but it's not very expensive either. One of the neat things about the Easy Sand powder that I didn't mention before is it comes in different times. So this is Easy Sand 20. I usually use 40 or 90, and those are the number of minutes that you're supposed to have from the time you mix it up until it starts to set up, like it gets hard like concrete. Maybe not quite that hard, but it does cure like concrete. So you want to make sure that you're planning ahead. You're only getting enough of that mud to put on the wall in the amount of time that it's specified for. So I would have a little less than 20 minutes to work with that. The benefit of that is then after you patch the wall, you can come back and you can sand it after maybe a half an hour or 45 minutes, and it's already dry enough to do that. Otherwise, with the +3 or one of the other pre-mixed, you have to wait maybe 12 or 24 hours until it's completely dry. So that's something to be thinking about. We're going to start out dealing with this hole here. And this is one that my friend Knowledge busted, but then I made it bigger because, we need a bigger hole. That hole is too big. We could actually just take a little bit of mud and shove it in that hole. Let's see, I'm going to get a little dish here. You don't need a fancy dish like this. You could use a cottage cheese container. You could use a yogurt container. I guess you could use your mom's best china if you really wanted to, but it doesn't have to be anything fancy. And we could take this and we could smear it right in the hole right away. We could just smear it all in there, and some of it would hang on, some of it would sag, some of it would fall down inside the wall, and that would be fine. We just have to come back again and fill in a little more and fill in a little more and fill in a little more. So instead of doing it that way, we're going to take something to fill in this hole to be sort of a hard backer before we do, before we actually put the mud on there. And I forgot my knife and my tape measure, so I'm going to grab those off the wall. Why can't I find a utility knife when I need it? Guess we'll do what we can do. So you kind of need something to measure with. You need something to cut drywall with. You don't have to have a fancy knife like this, but I did get a fancy knife. And you need some of this drywall wallboard. If you just have a small hole, you don't need to buy a big sheet. Usually the main size it comes in is 4 feet by 8 feet, but now a lot of the home centers and a lot of the hardware stores are carrying smaller quantities of it. So you can get like a 2 by 2 square or a 4 by 4 square. And that way you don't have to end up with a lot of extra material when you're finished. There are different thicknesses that this comes in. This is 1/2 inch thick, and we could probably show that because we've got cool cameras, right? So that's 1/2 inch thick. And I don't know that I have, oh, this might be 3/8 here. We're having fun here. We're just throwing things, that's all. So this one's a little less than 1/2 inch. This is about 3/8 of an inch. It does come in 5/8 of an inch, and I think there's even more like 3/4 or something like that, but I've never used it that thick. So we're going to figure out how big this hole is. We're going to clean up the hole a little bit. So I'm going to get my utility knife. Tiana's trying to clean up so that I don't make such a mess. I'm just trying to square off the corners a little bit here so that we don't have such rough corners, and it makes it a little easier to cut a piece of drywall to fit in there. Always cut away from myself. Safety first, right? So that's basically a square hole. Notice I'm just cutting it with a utility knife. I don't have to get a saw out. I don't have to do anything different than that. You could probably use your steak knife or, you know, maybe even a table knife at home. I'm using the utility knife because that's what I've got here. Now I'm going to measure what size hole that is. And I'm going to go just a little smaller than what the actual hole is. So this hole measures about 4 1/4. Up here, it's more like 4 1/8. So we'll go with the smallest diameter, or the smallest distance. So we'll go with 4 1/8. Oh, it's almost a perfect square. How convenient. So I'm going to clean up this hole just a little bit more right here. And then we're going to cut a piece of drywall that's 4 1/8 inch, and it will just be a square. Let's see. So I've got my drywall here. I'm going to measure 4 1/8, and I'm going to score where that is on the drywall. I could also just use a pencil and mark that, but I'm going 4 1/8, and I'm scoring, going 4 1/8 the other direction, and I'm scoring. And if I was being real fancy, I would get a square, and I'd make sure that this is perfectly square, but I didn't check that for square. I don't know if that hole is perfectly square or if it's lopsided or what it is. So I'm just going to score through the outside paper. Basically, drywall is a product called gypsum that is stuck between two pieces of paper. And the gypsum is real powdery, and so the paper holds it together. So I'm going to score this. And after I score it on one side, I can cut through the paper on the other side and get it to the size I need. So there, I've got 4 1/8 this direction. I've got my line here, and to break it, since it's already scored, it just bends. I can then come on the back side here and cut through that back paper. There's my little patch. Now I can check it and make sure that it's the right size. Looks like it'll fit. We have the benefit here of we can reach the back side of the wall. Most people at home can't do that. So if I happen to put it up here and I don't hold on to it tight enough, it's going to fall down into the hole, and it's going to be hard to get back out if you're at home. But we have to figure out a way to fasten it in there. We can't just perch it in there and have it hold. It's going to fall down inside the wall. So what we're going to do, since it's just an opening there, we need to put something in there that will hold the drywall up. And you can use a piece of scrap wood. I've got some thin little pieces of wood here that I cut earlier that are just scrap, but you could use a 2x4 if you wanted, as long as it can fit through this hole. So I'm going to take this, make sure that it fits. It's bigger than the hole. There's a little bit of unevenness there, so I might need to do some. Oh, we still have some drywall on the back. No wonder. It's really nice that I can reach through this wall. There we go. So we want something that we can fasten our piece of wood to, our backing. So that will work. Traditionally, drywall would have been hung with nails, usually 1 3/8 or 1.5 inch nails. So here are the nails that would normally be used. Most people today don't use nails anymore because every time you pound on that wall to put that nail in, it jars the whole wall and more pieces break out, and now you have more patching to do. So instead of that, I tend to use screws. 1 5/8 is my preferred size. They make screws like this with a fine thread and also with a coarse thread. I like fine thread a little bit better for drywall just because it's not quite so rough. It pulls in more slowly. It doesn't break things quite as quickly. I'm going to put a screw in the middle of this piece of wood. See my little screw there? And that's going to be my handle. I also will need a screw to fasten the top and the bottom. So I'm coming up here. I need to get this guy positioned just right. And now I'm going to try to put that screw through the part that is existing, that's still there, that's still solid. I'm going to slowly put that in. I'm going to have to hold it pretty tight. And I'm going to screw that in so that it's holding that piece of wood on there. Do the same thing at the top. It doesn't matter if it's straight or not, as long as it's there. And you want that head of the screw just below the surface of the drywall here and the drywall here, or the plaster, whichever you're doing. You could do the same thing for plaster. Now I left this screw in. We're going to take that screw back out. That was just there to give me something to hold on to so I didn't drop that guy back down into the wall, because that would be bad news. And then I'd have to try to cut another piece. Let's see. Where did I put my... Where did I put the little piece I cut? Oh, here it is. It's under the screws. All right. So now I have something I can fasten that piece of drywall to so that it doesn't fall down inside the wall, and so that it has something sturdy for us to mud over top of. My wall is moving. So I'm going to take 2 screws, put 2 screws into that same piece of wood, through the new piece of drywall. Hey, go in there. It's actually easier if the wall isn't moving, so you'll have that benefit at home. I mentioned that drywall comes in different thicknesses, so you would normally measure what the thickness is of this wall before you put your drywall in there, but it's okay if your drywall is thinner than the hole. You don't want the drywall thicker than the hole, or it's sticking out past, and then you have a little more of a problem because you have to add more mud to get up over that. I'm going to put a second screw in there. There we go. And that looks pretty good. So we basically patched the hole, but we haven't mudded the cracks yet. We could just take our mud now and smear that into those cracks. But as our walls in our house, as they get warmer, as they get colder, as humidity rises and humidity falls, we get cracks in our walls. And if we would just mud this in, just cover up those holes, those cracks would show up. So instead of doing that, we're going to do something called taping. Taping is basically putting another piece of paper similar to what is on the outside of the drywall over that gap so that the wall is a little bit more uniform and there's not that crack there. The crack would be covered. So I'm going to get, there's actually different kinds of tape as well. Some people like this mesh tape. I don't really like it. I think it's hard to use, but I've heard that it holds up better when walls are moving more. So they often use that in newer construction. This is the old standby. This is called joint tape. And again, very inexpensive at the home center. This whole roll probably costs less than $5. So not a big deal. Before I go any farther, does anyone have any questions yet? Okay, what's your question? How effective is the joint tape in comparison to the mesh tape? So it's a personal preference thing, really. And basically what we're trying to do with the joint tape is make it so that the paper backing of the drywall is continuous right over the hole. So the mesh stuff would do the same thing. I think it's harder to use because it's mesh and it's harder to hold on to. And I've gotten used to using this. This is what I used, when I first started doing drywall stuff. So
maybe a better question is, would that tape be better for older walls and the mesh tape be better for newer walls?
Would that be better for? Would that be better for? The question was, would this tape be better for older walls or for newer walls? And it isn't really going to matter very much either way. I tend to think of older walls not moving as much and newer walls moving more. But again, it's what you're used to. We could use both, and maybe we'll try to use both while we're here as well. Yeah, Tiana, what did you want to say?
One more question. What do you mean by a moving wall?
So as your house is getting warmer and colder with changing temperatures outside, changing temperatures inside, humidity changes, the materials that make up your house are going to change. So the walls, the wood in the walls is going to stretch and move a little bit. The plaster or the drywall, whatever you have, is going to move a little bit. Your floors are going to move. That's why your floors might start squeaking after you're in your house for a while, or you might develop a new squeak, or the squeak might go away because those things are all moving a little bit because they're different materials. So plaster moves differently than wood, and wood moves differently than cement, and cement moves differently than something else. So everything is moving just a little bit. It's not moving a lot. It's fractions of an inch, but there's still expansion and contraction happening in your home. Did that answer your question?
Yes, sir. Thank you.
Okay. And because you asked the question, we're gonna go ahead and use both tapes just to try it. So, do we have any questions online? No. Okay. Perfect. We didn't mention that, but if you are joining us online, put your questions down in the comment section, and we will try to answer them. I don't claim to be an expert in drywall. I know just enough to be dangerous. So I have done drywall at home. I've worked on a couple crews fixing drywall. I've never done a whole house of drywall, which is a big project, and I wouldn't want to do it, but I have done some drywall. So what we're going to do is get ready to mud this hole. Most people who do this will use a smaller knife, so not your great big one. I'm actually going to use what is this, about a 2.5 or 3 inch. So I'm going to take a little bit of my mud. I'm going to mix it around here just a little bit because I want to make sure that it's nice and uniform. And I'm going to smear this down into the hole. I'm going to get a nice little coating on there. And Jake would be yelling at me right now because I'm not holding everything at one time. I'm going to take my tape, and I'm going to put that right into the mud that I just put in there, that I just put over the crack. And I'm going to pull that down, get that mud sort of mixed in with the tape. Now I can tear that. All right, use my knife as a knife. How about that? So there's one side of our hole patched. Now, Tiana wanted to see how the mesh tape works, so we're going to try that as well. Like I said, I don't like the mesh tape as well because it's harder to rip, and it just feels awkward to me, I guess. So I'm going to get some mud on there. We're going to take our tape, and here with the mesh, we can sort of squeeze it right down into that mud. And now I have to try to tear it, and it didn't work. So I'm going to go back to my trusty utility knife, and I'm going to cut it with that because apparently my drywall knife is not sharp enough for it. We'll try this again. Looks a little raggedy now, doesn't it? So we're trying to push that down into the mud. I'm going to have to fix that a little bit because I've got some hairy pieces sticking out. There we go. That looks a little better. And now I can take a little bit more mud and I can patch right over top of that mesh. So the mesh kind of lets the drywall mud go through it a little bit more. The tape, it's more like you're just getting the tape wet, and then it absorbs some of the moisture from the mud as well. One thing I didn't mention, I'm using this little tray here. I don't like to use right out of my bucket, because then when I get done and I'm scraping off my knife again here, I would be getting dirt from the wall after doing this back into my bucket. So that bucket is going to stay clean. This is what I'm working with right now. So I'm not getting more mud out here than what I need. I'm just getting the amount that I am going to be using. Now we can go back, and it's kind of up to you if you want to patch more at the top edge here. We still have a pretty good gap. There's a pretty good gap down here. Some people would patch over that a little bit more. Some people would say, no, that's good enough. I don't need to patch that anymore. So we're going to patch it just because that's what we're doing here tonight. Oops. So I just have a couple short little pieces that we're going to patch in there. So it doesn't look perfect, but I would stop right there and let that dry, come back tomorrow, and before I do my next coat, I would get either a sanding sponge. I think I've got a sanding sponge in here, or maybe not. My sanding sponge has disappeared. Oh well, okay. So there's a couple different kinds of sanding utensils you can use. I usually like to use a sponge, which is a squishy material that has sort of sandpaper on the outside of it. And that it helps take the high spots off real easily. This thing here is a little bit more aggressive. This is called a sanding screen, and it takes a lot more off than what the sanding sponge does. I often, when I try to use this, I'll end up taking off too much, and then I have to patch again. So we have an area here that we patched last time we did this class, and so I just wanted to show you what that looks like to sand over it. So it smooths down all the rough edges. And you're not looking for your wall to be perfect. You're looking for your wall to be better than it was before. You're looking for your wall to be good enough, because you're never going to be able to have it perfect. There's always going to be little ridges in your wall. If you go up against your wall as tight to the wall as you can and shine a light down it, oftentimes you can see where the ripples are, and you can try to get those out. You can work those out a little bit. But basically, you're wanting it so that when you are looking at your wall from a distance, you're not seeing any imperfections. So you're making sure there's no little dimples. You can see here there's some little bubbles from when we did this last time. So we would want to get all that out. There's some spots here that we would want to get out. And it does get dusty. If you have a lot of allergies, I would suggest making sure that you might even want to get your wall a little bit damp so that the dust isn't collecting everywhere. But you'd also want to wear a respirator. One of the nice things about drywall mud is that it doesn't have lead in it. It doesn't have heavy metals in it. It's basically a natural product. I wouldn't want to eat it, but if you inhale some of it, if you get some in your mouth, it's not going to make you sick. It's considered non-toxic. So we'll sand this a little bit more. And now if I was patching this, I would put a little bit more mud in a couple of those spots because they're a little bit deep, and we would we would put the mud in there with a knife, let it dry, and tomorrow we would deal with it again. If you are doing something where you need to sand it more sooner, that's when you would use the 20-minute mud or 40-minute mud, and that way you can work with it a lot quicker. You don't have to wait quite as long. I did mention that we have a couple spots up here that are just the size of hammerhead, and those probably don't even need anything behind them because they're a small enough hole we can just mud right over them, or we could put tape over them and mud over the tape. One time that I have found that it doesn't work well to just mud over and tape over it is those pesky spots where the kids open the door too fast and the doorknob goes through the wall. Those don't usually work to just tape over it. You'll want to put a piece of drywall in there instead. Uh-oh, Kaylin's walking around. Oh, I thought my battery was dying or something, so we're trying new equipment today for our sound system, so if you're listening at home, I hope it's sounding okay. So there, I just patched up that one little hole. And just like we did with this other spot here, we'd let that dry. We could come back tomorrow, feather it around it a little bit more, and we'd probably have to sand it one more time and feather a little bit more, and then we'd be done. I need a little bit more mud on my knife. We have a question online. All right, let's hear it.
So the question is, can you use a sanding block? If so, what number grit?
So if you're using a sanding block, Dorothy, I appreciate the question. If you're using a sanding block, what grit number? If you're doing this initial one, you're going to want something fairly coarse, probably a 60 or a 40. 40 would probably be too coarse. Maybe a 60 or an 80. The higher the number, the finer the sandpaper. So I'm not even sure what we have here. This is probably like 100 or 120 on this one. I don't really like to use the sandpaper because it plugs up with the drywall so quickly. So the sanding sponges, which I normally have here in my bin, but I can't find any tonight, they work really well because if it gets plugged up in that sanding sponge, you can wash it out and it cleans it all out and away you go. So you can use sandpaper, especially if you're just doing a small area. I would suggest doing sandpaper. Another spot that would work really well for that is if you're trying to fill in nail holes before you're painting. You could fill in the nail holes, and with that, you wouldn't even need. You definitely wouldn't want to buy a whole bucket of the mud for that, but you could go along with a small putty knife, even smaller than this, and fill in those holes. And then after it dries, you could easily go over that with sandpaper and just sort of rough it up a little. One of the other things that the sandpaper helps it do is it smooths the wall so that it's ready to accept paint. So if you're getting ready to paint, you want to make sure you're sanding your wall first, even if you had paint on it before. You can still go over the whole thing with paint, and it will help it adhere a lot better. So I hope I answered that question for you, Dorothy. If not, let me know. Hold me accountable. How about that? So if you have an older home, you probably have inside your walls, or on your walls, you probably have plaster. And plaster is a different material than drywall. It's something that was used up until 1960s, 1970s. Drywall became more popular. Plaster is much harder to work with. And that's because it's more like cement. It isn't like you can just slap it up there and away you go. It's a much harder material. Some people will say that you don't want to use drywall compound or drywall mud with plaster because they're going to shrink and expand at different rates. So like we were talking about before, you could end up having the area pop out more. One of the neat things with plaster is it is basically a peanut butter consistency material from the time you put it on until you're done and you walk away. You let it cure, but you don't have pieces that you have to cut. Instead, it's troweled on. It's basically put on with a knife or with a trowel. It would have these pieces here. These are called lath or lathe, depending which part of the country you're in. So the carpenter would come along as they're building the house. They would tack these strips of wood all the way around the room, multiple strips of wood. And then the plasterer would come in and would take the plaster and basically shove that plaster back through the gaps in this lath. And what that plaster would do is when it gets through those holes, it gets shoved back through there. Some of it will hang over the back, and it basically locks it in, so it can't pull out, it can't go anywhere, and so it becomes much more rigid with that wood. So it is going to stretch and move with the wood rather than stretching and moving by itself. So when we're doing patching of those kinds of walls, it's real tough to find somebody who still does plaster. There are people out there yet who still do plaster, but they're very expensive. It's a very artistic skill. It's a skill that is being lost in many areas. So most people are going to patch it with drywall. And you can still patch it by taking the mud and shoving the mud back through there so that it's holding on, and then putting a piece of drywall in and then mudding over top of that again. And so that's what we're going to try to do tonight, so that it's locked more to the back, and it's also locked to the area around it. But like I said, with plaster, this would all be plaster too. And so in our example here, we don't have a plaster wall. This is actually drywall, but we're pretending it's plaster. So we have to use our imagination a little. So I need somebody to help me up here. Who would like to help? No one wants to help? Do you want to help knowledge, or do you want to just watch? We could get Tiana up here to help too. Okay. Tiana's going to come up and help. So Tiana, we've got some mud here, and what we're going to do, we're going to try to push that back into this wood here a little bit. Okay. Actually, before we do that, let's take our measurement for what size piece we want to put in. So we want to have a piece maybe 6 inches by, how about 6 by 5? Does that look good? Mm-hmm. Okay. So we'll do a piece 6 by 5. Do you see how we did that before? Mm-hmm. What do we got here? 4.5. That's only 4.5. What do you think we should do?
How long is it?
It's plenty long enough. So we're going to do 6 by 4.5. How about that?
Okay. What will you do? How will you make it long enough?
We will put it in, and then we will mud around it. Okay. Would you like to show me how you do this? So remember, you just need to go through the... Now we can't see with our camera.
Oh.
It's okay. Go ahead. I can turn this, and then we can see you. Maybe. So you just score it. Yep. And then you can put your knife aside, and you should be able to break that. And then you could take your knife, and if you cut through the backside now, it should come right off. Look at that. Nice work. Does it fit?
It fits.
Except we don't want it to be up above here. We want it to be flush. So does it fit that way? Doesn't fit that way either. We're going to have to trim a little bit off of here, but we can do that.
Okay.
Okay, so we're going to trim a little here. Remember, we're talking about plaster here. And I'm going to take one of my knives here and see if we can pull some of this out. You can see how it's locked in into the lath there so that it doesn't fall out.
When did they stop using plaster for walls?
Some of the high-end houses, like the people who were building, mansions, some of them still do plaster. But most people in common houses, it was stopped in probably the 60s or 70s.
Okay.
Do we still need to trim a little more?
I would say on this side just so that it could be a little more
Okay.
flush.
Did you want to trim it? We have to be careful because our wall moves. Which walls at home shouldn't move. Make sure you're not cutting towards your fingers, because that would be bad to show that on live
so bad.
on live camera.
You cut away from yourself. Make sure that we say that.
Does it fit now?
It fits
it
now.
fits beautifully. Very nicely done. Nice and flush. So what we're going to do next, Tiana? Oh, are you leaving me, or are you going to stay here?
Never. I'm right here.
Never. She's going to stay right here. Or did you want to bring up one of your helpers to help you?
I was hoping the helper could help, but I can hold it down.
So we're going to take some of this. I would like you to scoop that up, and then I want you to smear it all over the wood and through the wood, over the river and through the woods. And don't be afraid to put a lot on there, because anything that's excessive is going to fall down inside the wall. So it's not going to really matter. Beautiful. Beautiful. And that's going to help lock this in a little bit when we put this piece on. But since we have that lath back there, we don't have to fill in like we did with that other hole. We don't have to put a nailer behind it. We can just put it right up against the lath and screw it on. Plaster is also going to vary by thickness, and usually it's going to be thicker than 1/2 inch, which is what we're using for drywall tonight. So we can even do something like this. Watch this. We can back butter it a little bit.
Back butter it.
Doesn't that look like fun?
Mm-hmm.
All right. Do you want to stick that on there and see how it looks? Squish it in there. I kind of like drywall because you can be nice and messy. The problem is if you're trying to do this in a house where it's, people are still living there. So if you're patching the hole in your own house, it gets a little messy. So we're going to get a couple screws to put in there.
Jason, what happens in situations like this where there's a gap? Do you need
where
to
there's a
fill
gap,
that out?
we will add mud to that, but we'll also put tape over that.
Okay.
So it will bridge that gap.
Okay.
Do you still remember how to use power tools?
I think so.
Okay. Lee Taylor taught you well?
Lee Taylor taught me well.
All right. Let's see what you got.
And where do you want this to go? Just right here?
Actually, I'm going to slow this down a little for you. There we go.
Please.
So
right
remember
here?
where those pieces are. There's a piece here, and there's a
Mhm.
piece here. So we don't want it right next to the edge, or it's going to break it out. So we want to be down you might want to come down a little bit more, maybe 1/2 inch. Like there, that's probably good. And basically, we're just getting it to stay there until we... Go ahead, push. I'm holding the wall so it doesn't move away from you. Beautiful. Up a little bit more so that it's not... We don't want the head sticking out. Oops. We must have gone right through between the lath. I think you just missed it.
Oh.
We'll try another screw. Go down just a little bit more, maybe another 1/2 inch.
About there?
Go up a little higher than that, I think. And then we can remove that screw that you already put in. There we go.
There
you see
we
how
go.
it pulled in?
Yep.
And now, do you know where reverse is on that drill? And then you can see if we can take that one out. Doesn't want to come out, does it? Okay, here's a little trick. Try it now. There we go.
Oh, that's pretty cool.
So we were just putting a little bit of tension on it so that it would pull out. So now we want to do another one maybe over here. And then we could even put another one down here someplace. Oops, now we have to go forward again. Good catch.
think I'm on another.
I think you're slipping just a little bit. So you want to make sure you're on straight on with the screw.
Okay, should I reverse it a little?
No, I think it's good. It is going at a little bit of an angle.
I think that's because I'm standing at an angle.
That could be. Do you need a step ladder? There, we got it. That thing sucked right in. Beautiful. Do you want to add one more, or do you want to leave it at that?
I think I want to leave it at that.
Okay. We'll leave it at that. We're going to get a little bit more mud in our bucket. It's kind of fun. I can hear us delayed on a phone in the audience. We won't say whose phone, right?
No.
Do you want to do this part too?
Sure.
Okay. So you can basically mud the whole way around it, and then we'll get some tape, and we'll put some tape over that. Beautiful. Do you feel like you're icing a cake?
I do. It's very therapeutic.
It is. That it is.
Now, do I need to worry about getting mud in the corner?
What do you mean mud in the corner?
Where the gaps are, or is that what the tape is for?
So you can get the mud everywhere, and then we can put the tape over it.
Okay.
So the tape just helps it, gives it a little bit more structure and helps to adhere it to the paper on the existing drywall or on the existing plaster. Don't do too good of a job, Tiana, because I still have some drywall that I need to do at home, and nobody in my house wants to do it.
Okay,
because it's a job.
It's a job, but it's so therapeutic.
But it also makes a mess. We need to do some in our kitchen, and you don't really want to do it while you're cooking.
No, and you also don't want to do it when it's 100 degrees.
You also don't want to do it when it's 100 degrees. I keep forgetting it's 100 degrees out today because it's nice and cool in here. I'm going to do commentary while we're doing this. So we are back in person, technically. If folks at home want to come and learn stuff and get connected with people again, we are doing these classes every Tuesday night. And you're welcome to join us. We do ask that you register on our website at communityhomeworks.org. And that way we know how many people to expect. And we are asking people in the classroom to wear a mask at this point, just to try to keep the germs down low. And but we are air conditioned, and that's one of the benefits of coming out to our classes right now, is that you can cool off while you're here. I'm going to ask you, Tiana, to add a little bit more right along this edge here, because we're going to want to put some tape right in there. Nice plop noise. I like that.
That's where you're saying it gets a little messy.
Gets a little messy. That's okay, though. You're doing a great job, though.
I really appreciate that. It's empowering to be able to repair your own home. I recently became a homeowner, and I have some walls that just need a little attention. And I thought it was a bigger job than what it's really going to be, but I feel confident enough that I think I could handle it.
Are your walls smooth, or are they textured?
They are smooth.
Okay. My walls have a texture to them, and I learned that if I take drywall mud to fill in a hole, it looks too smooth. And so if I take a small toothbrush or a scrub brush and just bump over the spot where I just patched, it will add the texture that almost matches what's already there.
Oh, wow.
So you can be creative with things like that too. Like, oh, I can match this up pretty well, so nobody can even tell. And yes, it's not going to be perfect, but it's going to be close enough. I think you got that well enough, Tiana.
Well, I'm so concerned about these screws.
The screws. Okay. So the screws are sticking out just a little bit, but because this piece that we just put in is thinner than the surrounding material, the plaster around it, those are going to be completely covered up. So you don't even have to worry about them. Would you like to do some taping, or did you want someone else to do it?
I can tape.
Okay.
Since I'm here.
Since you're here. Okay. So you need to figure out how long of a piece. It's not, the tape is not adhesive. It's just basically just a strip of paper. I like how you're getting your hands right in there. And we don't want it to extend out past where we had the,
So I would cut it there.
so we can cut it there,
Okay.
out past where we had the mud. So where else do you want to mud? Did you want the knife or do you just want to tear it?
I can use the knife.
Okay. The knife makes a nice
Clean
cut, in theory. Nice job. I'm so glad you dressed for manual labor tonight.
I knew that dressing for manual labor was a requirement, and so I put on my manual labor clothing. Now, I have a question.
Yes, ma'am.
In this situation,
Mm-hmm.
so I would cut it here.
You can cut it there. That's fine. You did overlap quite a bit. So this corner has like 3 pieces of paper on now because
That's what I was asking
1,
about.
2, 3. But it should still be okay if you put enough mud in there. It will make all those layers adhere.
So what should I have done?
So you could have
stacked it
stopped
here?
right there. You could
Okay.
have stopped right at the edge of the other tape, and it would have been just fine. And you could even leave a little gap, and it would be just fine.
Okay.
It's like arts and crafts and wall repair at the same time.
Right. I see now how it could go. Okay.
Okay. And then we want to mud over that a little bit. Beautiful. If you get pricing for somebody to come to your house and patch your walls like this, it's ridiculously expensive because they have to patch, they have to sand, they have to patch, they have to sand, they have to patch, and maybe even sand again. Professionals will get it done much quicker than you can as a homeowner, but they charge that for that. And so having a little hole patched up at your house doesn't really make sense to hire a contractor if you can do it yourself. And like I said, you don't need any special tools. The materials that we used here tonight, you could buy everything to patch that hole we just patched for probably under $20. Now you're learning a little bit that it bubbles a little bit sometimes when you put that mud in there, which is that's a sign that it's time to stop and let it dry. So you could still take off some of those high spots. Otherwise, you'll be sanding them off later. But you're forcing the mud back into the wall, into those cracks. Beautiful. So now we would let that dry, come back tomorrow, sand it, put another coat over top of it, let it dry again, sand it again, and then decide whether it needs a third coat or not. But you can do this on your walls at home too now, right?
I can. I'm just still concerned about this screw right there.
That screw is not going to matter.
Okay.
So I mentioned before that as you're going farther along, if you use a wider knife, that will fill in a lot of those low spots. So if you take your wider knife, I don't know if I have enough mud here, but I could take the wider knife. This is after it dries, and I can go over that, and it smooths it all out real nicely. I will tell you that the wider knife gives you more of an arm workout too, though, because you're pushing that whole thing along the wall, dragging the mud. So see, now your nails are gone. Isn't that cool?
It's very cool.
All right. We are almost out of time. Do we have any other questions from online, Kaylin? We do not. Do we have any other questions from our studio audience? Knowledge, now's your chance to ask anything you want to ask. Huh? I still didn't hear you.
He was paying attention.
Oh, he's paying attention. Okay. Yeah, so I think we're going to stop there. There are a lot of other things we could talk about with wall repairs and how to do corners. And this is a corner right here. Oftentimes it's a plastic or a metal corner. And you basically just fill that in with mud. And so the mud is holding the corner together, but the corner is, the plastic or metal piece is reinforcing that corner. So that would be an outside corner. If we're doing an inside corner, which would be where two walls come together like this, we could use the same tape. And I don't know if you noticed, Tiana, this tape has a crease in the middle.
I saw that.
And so that is so you can fold it in half and you can basically mud it right into that corner. And that keeps that corner nice and straight. It keeps it reinforced, and it lets the mud dry in there, and it'll be nice and strong. So that works as well. Trying to think if there's anything else I want to talk about here tonight. We didn't patch this one little hole, but we're going to leave that. And when we come back for the next time we teach this class, we will sand over the stuff that we just did here and mud over top of that another time as well. I wanted to thank everybody at home for joining us tonight. If you do have questions later on, please feel free to you can still put that in the comment section, or you can email us at education@communityhomeworks.org, and we will try to get you an answer to those questions. Like I mentioned, we have these classes going on every Tuesday night. We'd like people to come out and see us. We're lonely in this space. We need some other people in here as well to talk to us and keep us from going nuts. Next week class, Tiana, do you remember? I should know this offhand, and I don't, because I'm completely blanking.
Next week's class is going to be...
She's looking. I'm sorry, I can't hear it. Oh, okay. Next week is air conditioning and ventilation. And that will be with the one and only Lee Taylor. So we're looking forward to that one as well. So thanks again for joining us. Have a great evening, everyone. And go have fun mudding your house, but please stay cool.